The morning I placed 2 plates on the counter and walked out of that house, I wasn't angry. I was completely, utterly calm. And somehow, that scared my husband more than any screaming match ever could have. He stood there in his flannel pajamas, staring at those plates like they were evidence at a crime scene, because, in a way, they were. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this actually started. A cold Tuesday evening in November, a pot of beef stew that filled the whole house with the smell of rosemary and onion, and the specific, sinking realization that not one drop of it was meant for me. I'm Nora. I'm 30 years old. I teach 5th grade at Clover Ridge Elementary, which sits about 2 miles from the cottage community where my husband Garrett and I had been living for the past 3 years. Our place was a 2-bedroom on Sycamore Lane, beige siding, covered front porch, a yard that backed up to a creek that flooded every spring. We'd signed the lease together the same month we got married, back when everything felt like it was finally clicking into place. 3 years. Not long by some measures, but long enough that I'd stopped noticing the small things. Long enough that a certain kind of comfortable blindness had settled in, the way it does when you're tired from a 40-minute commute and 26 10-year-olds who need more from you than you sometimes have to give. Garrett worked in logistics for a regional distribution company. He was steady. That had always been the word I used for him. Steady income, steady moods. Steady in the way a piece of furniture is steady. You stop appreciating it until you stub your toe on it in the dark. We weren't unhappy. I want to be clear about that. We were just moving in parallel. Busy. November tired, if you know what that means. The stretch of the school year where the initial energy is gone and winter break feels impossibly far away. His mother, Diane, had been staying with us for 11 days by the time Tuesday rolled around. I should explain Diane. She was 63, recently retired from a job she never quite explained to my satisfaction. Something administrative, she said, waving her hand like the details were beneath discussion. She lived 40 minutes north of us in a condo she'd bought when Garrett's parents divorced, back when Garrett was in college. She and I had never been close, but we'd never been hostile either. We existed in a kind of careful politeness, the way you do with someone you didn't choose but inherited. She called Garrett baby well into his 30s. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets the second day she arrived and told me my spice organization was chaotic. I smiled and put the paprika back where she'd moved it. She was staying because her building was having some kind of HVAC repair done. At least, that's what Garrett told me. He'd asked if she could come for about a week, and I'd said sure, because what else do you say? She was his mother. She was 63 years old, and it was November, and I wasn't going to make a scene over a guest bed and a few shared meals. I got home that Tuesday at 5:40. The sky outside was the color of a bruise, that flat purple-gray that settles over the suburbs in late November and makes everything look slightly abandoned. I could smell dinner before I even got my coat off. My stomach actually growled. I'd skipped lunch to sit with a student who was having a rough day, and I was hungry in that hollow, almost dizzy way. Diane was at the stove. She had the overhead light on and the small TV on the counter running some home renovation show at low volume. She didn't look up when I came in. "Smells amazing," I said. And I meant it. The stew was thick and dark in the pot, little wisps of steam curling up. There was a whole loaf of crusty bread on the cutting board, already sliced. "It's Garrett's favorite," she said, still not looking at me. I set my bag down and washed my hands at the kitchen sink. "How much longer does it need?" "About 20 minutes. "Perfect. I'll go change and come back and set the table." She didn't respond. I figured she was focused on cooking. I went to the bedroom, changed out of my work clothes. I'd had marker on my sleeve all day and hadn't noticed until third period, and came back out. Garrett had arrived home while I was changing. He and his mother were talking at the kitchen table, and there were 2 bowls already on the counter. 2. His and hers, I assumed. I went to the cabinet and pulled out a third bowl. "Oh," Diane said, and her voice had a particular quality, not embarrassed exactly, more like mildly inconvenienced. "I didn't make enough for 3. I held the bowl for a second, just processing that. "The pot looks pretty full," I said. I kept my voice neutral. I'd learned in 3 years of marriage to Garrett that the first response matters. "It's the right amount for 2, she said. I portioned it out. Garrett needs a good meal after work. We don't want to stretch it thin." I looked at Garrett. He was looking at the table. "Garrett," I said. He finally looked up, and what I saw on his face was not surprise, not embarrassment. It was a kind of preemptive fatigue, like a man who has already decided which hill he's going to die on and has quietly accepted it. "Mom makes this stew a specific way," he said. "It's a 2-person recipe. She didn't know you'd want some." "I live here," I said. "Nora, I live here, Garrett. This is my kitchen. I came home hungry from work. Your mother made dinner in my kitchen and didn't make enough for me." Diane made a soft sound, not quite a sigh, more like the sound a person makes when they find a minor inconvenience philosophically interesting. "I'm just being careful with the grocery budget," she said. "I bought what I bought. I can't conjure food from thin air." I want to tell you what the grocery budget situation actually was. Diane had not contributed a single dollar to food since she'd arrived. I had bought 2 full grocery runs in 11 days. Garrett occasionally picked up beer. The grocery budget she was referencing was mine. I looked at him again. And here's the part that landed the hardest. Not her dismissiveness, not the empty bowl in my hand. It was the way Garrett shrugged. "She's just being frugal," he said. "It's not a big deal. Can you just find something else? There's leftover pasta, I think." He said it so easily, like I was the unreasonable one for expecting to eat dinner in my own home. Like 11 days of hosting and working and paying for groceries had used up my reasonable expectations quota. "Don't nitpick," he added, quieter, almost under his breath. I stood there for a moment. I felt something shift in my chest. Not break, not crack, just shift. The way a key turns in a lock you didn't know was there. I put the bowl back in the cabinet. "You're right," I said. "It's not a big deal." I ate cereal standing at the counter while they had their stew. Diane didn't look at me. Garrett ate quickly and talked to his mother about something on TV. I washed my bowl when I was done and went to the living room and graded papers until 10 o'clock. When I went to bed, I lay there in the dark listening to the creek out back, which was running high from a week of cold rain. Garrett came in around 11, slid in beside me and said, "You're not still upset about dinner, are you?" I said no, and I wasn't upset, not anymore. Something had moved past upset in me and settled into something much quieter and much more purposeful. Because what Garrett didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that 3 days earlier, I'd come home early from a professional development day, and I'd found Diane at my desk in the spare room. Not just sitting at it, she'd had my filing drawer open, the one where I keep important documents. Insurance papers, the lease, our joint account statements. And she'd been holding a piece of paper that I was almost certain was our mortgage pre-approval letter from the previous spring, from when Garrett and I had briefly looked into buying a place before deciding to stay in the rental another year. She'd closed the drawer quickly when she heard me, smiled and said she'd been looking for a pen. I'd smiled back and handed her one from the cup on the desk. I didn't say anything, but I'd noticed, and that night, lying in the dark after the stew incident, I thought about a phone call I'd overheard 2 days before that. Diane on the back porch, voice low, saying something about the property and making sure it's documented properly to someone I couldn't identify. I didn't know yet what she was looking for in that drawer. I didn't know yet about the man who would show up at our door 4 days later, claiming to be a distant cousin of Garrett's deceased grandfather, with a manila envelope full of papers that would make my stomach drop straight through the floor. But that night, I made a decision. I set my alarm for 5:15, an hour earlier than usual. I had something I needed to do before anyone else in the house woke up, and when the alarm went off in the gray pre-dawn of that Wednesday morning, I got up, got dressed quietly in the dark, and I did it. What I did that Wednesday morning at 5:15 was this. I photographed every single document in that filing drawer. I did it methodically, standing in the dark spare room with the door pulled almost shut, using only the flashlight function on my phone so the light wouldn't bleed under the bedroom door. Insurance policies, the lease agreement, our joint account statements going back 18 months, the mortgage pre-approval letter, a folder I kept with copies of my pay stubs and my W-2s. I photographed them all, front and back, then emailed the whole batch to an address Garrett didn't know I had, an old Gmail from before we met, the kind of account you forget you have until you need it. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Exactly. I was careful about the order, careful about which way each folder faced. I'd noticed, the afternoon I caught Diane at the desk, that she'd been careful too. That told me something. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the dark while it brewed, listening to the house. The creak out back, the hiss of the furnace cycling on, the particular silence of a place where two other people are sleeping and don't know what you're doing. I thought about the phone call I'd overheard, the property, making sure it's documented properly. I'd been turning those phrases over in my mind for 2 days, and they hadn't gotten any clearer. What property? We rented. We didn't own anything. Garrett had some money in a 401k through his company, and I had a Roth IRA I'd been funding since I was 24, but neither of those was property in the way Diane had said it, weighted, specific, like a word that points at a particular thing. I drank my coffee and got ready for work. I left before either of them woke up. That was the first morning I left without saying goodbye. The man showed up on Saturday. I want to tell you I was prepared for him. I wasn't. Garrett answered the door because I was in the kitchen, and I heard a voice I didn't recognize, male, older, with a flat Midwestern accent, and then Garrett saying, "I'm sorry, who?" And then silence for a moment that went on about 3 beats too long. I came to the doorway and looked. The man was maybe 65, wearing a gray down vest over a collared shirt, holding a manila envelope with both hands, like it was something he'd carried a long way. He had the kind of face that's been weathered without being interesting, just worn, careful, watching. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," he said. "My name is Dale Pritchard. I'm an attorney. I represent the estate of Raymond Kowalski." Garrett's face went very still. "My grandfather's been dead for 9 years. "I know," Dale Pritchard said. "That's why I'm here." Diane came out of the hallway behind me so fast that I actually startled. I hadn't heard her coming. She moved between me and the doorway, and when she saw Dale Pritchard, something happened in her expression that I couldn't read in the moment, but would understand later. A rapid compression, like a person pulling in their perimeter. "Who called you?" she said. Dale Pritchard looked at her steadily. "I've been trying to reach the family for about 6 weeks. I sent letters to the last known addresses. I wasn't getting responses." He glanced at Garrett. "Your grandfather's estate had an asset that was never properly adjudicated at the time of his death, a parcel of land, about 14 acres in Calhoun County. It's been sitting in probate limbo for nearly a decade because the paperwork was never finalized." He held out the envelope. "There's an heir determination pending. You're named as a potential beneficiary, but there's a complication." Garrett took the envelope. His hands, I noticed, were not entirely steady. I looked at Diane. She was looking at the floor. "What kind of complication?" Garrett asked. Dale Pritchard's eyes moved briefly to Diane, then back to Garrett. "There's a competing claim," he said, "filed approximately 8 months ago, by a person asserting power of attorney over the estate interests." He paused. "I'd really recommend you get your own legal counsel before we go much further." He left his card. He left. Garrett closed the door and stood there holding the envelope. And the 3 of us were in the entryway together in a silence that had a particular texture, dense, pressurized, the kind of silence that exists right before something irreversible gets said. Diane spoke first. "That man doesn't know what he's talking about," she said. "Raymond's estate was settled years ago. There's nothing left." "Then what's in the envelope, Mom?" "I don't know. Whatever some ambulance-chasing attorney put together to justify his fee." Garrett opened the envelope. He read for a long time. I watched his face. I watched the moment when something landed in him that he hadn't expected. A slight slackening around the jaw, a breath he let out through his nose. "There's a power of attorney document in here," he said, "filed 8 months ago." He looked up. "In your name." The silence that followed was different from the first one. The first one had been pressurized. This one was hollow. "I was protecting your interests," Diane said. "Raymond was my father-in-law. I knew the family. I knew what he wanted. You were divorced from Dad when Grandpa died. We were still family." "Mom," his voice was quiet, quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Did you know about this land when you got here?" She didn't answer. That was its own answer. I went back to the kitchen. I needed to not be in that room for a minute. I stood at the sink and looked out the window at the backyard, at the creek, which had come up another inch from the overnight rain, at the bare November trees on the far bank. My hands were on the cold edge of the porcelain sink, and I focused on that, the specific cold of it, the solidness. Because here's what I understood, standing there. Diane hadn't come because of HVAC repairs. She'd come because of that envelope. She'd come to find out what documents we had, what Garrett knew, what connection he had to a piece of land in Calhoun County that was apparently worth fighting over. She'd been in my filing drawer looking for the pre-approval letter, not out of nosiness, but because she wanted to know how much we were worth, how much Garrett might have a stake in, what she was working with. The phone call about the property wasn't vague. It was specific. She'd been coordinating, and Garrett had been her cover, her reason to be in our house. And when I'd asked to eat dinner in my own kitchen, he'd told me not to nitpick. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face, twice. Then I dried my face with the dish towel and stood there and thought about what came next. I'm a 5th-grade teacher. People underestimate what that means. You spend every single day managing 26 human beings who are all at different stages of understanding the world, who all want different things, who all have different breaking points, and you have to hold the whole room together while simultaneously making sure each individual kid gets what they need. You learn to read a situation before it reads you. You learn to move quietly when it matters. I went to the spare room and I called my sister, Renata. Renata was 34, 2 years older than me, and she was a paralegal at a family law firm in Columbus. She was the person I should have called weeks ago, maybe months ago, before the stew, before the filing drawer, before Dale Pritchard and his manila envelope. But I hadn't called her because I'd been doing what I always do, which is telling myself that things aren't as bad as they look, that I'm overreacting, that the next few days will clarify everything. The November tired version of hope. "Okay," Renata said, when I'd told her everything in a low voice with the door closed. "Okay, first, don't touch anything in that house that isn't already yours. Don't move money, don't close accounts, don't do anything that looks like you're preparing for a fight. Not yet." "I already photographed the documents." A pause. "Good. That was actually smart. Email me those. All of them." Another pause. "Nora, does Garrett know you did that?" "No." "Keep it that way for now." I heard her exhale slowly. "The land thing, that's a separate issue and it's complicated, but it's not your fight, it's his. What is your fight is that there's a woman living in your home who's been rifling through your financial documents, and your husband told you to sit down and eat cereal when she didn't bother to cook for you. Those two things are connected. She's been assessing him, assessing what he has, and he doesn't see it yet." "He's starting to," I said. "Maybe, but starting to see it, and actually doing something about it are very different things, and you need to protect yourself regardless of which way he goes." She was quiet for a second. "Do you want me to come down?" I looked at the closed door. On the other side of it, somewhere in the house, Garrett and Diane were having a conversation that was going to determine a lot about what the next year of my life looked like. I didn't know what they were saying. I didn't know yet which version of Hammer was going to emerge from that conversation, the one who'd shrugged over a bowl of stew, or someone different. "Yes," I said. "Come down." She arrived Sunday evening with an overnight bag and a name, a family law attorney named Patricia Osei, who had an office 20 minutes from our house, and who Renata said was, in her words, calm, thorough, and genuinely scary in a deposition. I hadn't told Garrett that Renata was coming. When she knocked on the door, he opened it with the particular expression of a man who has been blindsided twice in 2 days and is developing a reflexive brace for it. "Hey, Garrett," Renata said, stepping inside with her bag over her shoulder, completely relaxed, like she stopped by every week. "Hope I'm not interrupting." She looked at me across the room. Just a quick look, a fraction of a second that said, "I see the whole board. We've got this." That was the first time since Tuesday night that I felt the ground under my feet again. Diane was in the living room when Renata walked in. The two of them had never met. Diane looked at my sister the way you look at someone who's just walked into a room carrying something you can't quite identify, but instinctively know is meant for you. "I'm Renata," my sister said pleasantly, sitting down on the couch like she lived there. "Nora's sister. I'm in town for a few days," she smiled. "I've heard so much about you, Diane." The room was quiet. The furnace clicked on. Outside, the creek was running high and fast, carrying everything the rain had loosened downstream to wherever things go when they let go. I sat down next to my sister. I put my hands in my lap. I was calm, genuinely calm. The same calm I'd felt that Wednesday morning in the dark, with my phone and the filing drawer. The same calm that had apparently alarmed Garrett more than any argument could have. I was calm because I was no longer waiting for something to happen. I was the thing that was about to happen. And on Monday morning, while Garrett was at work and Diane was in the shower, I kept the appointment Renata had made for me with Patricia Osei, family law attorney, who told me in the first 15 minutes that I had more options than I'd realized, and in the next 15 minutes began helping me understand exactly how to use them. Patricia Osei's office was on the second floor of a building that also housed a dentist and a state farm agent, which somehow made it feel more real than I expected. Not a glossy downtown firm, just a practical woman in a practical space who dealt with practical catastrophes every single day. She had a clean desk, a small potted plant that looked genuinely healthy, and the kind of unhurried stillness that tells you a person has heard worse than your story and survived it. She listened to everything without interrupting. The stew, the filing drawer, Dale Pritchard and his manila envelope, the phone call about the property, Renata's advice about the documents. She listened the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, not emotionally, but with complete attention. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and said, "Tell me about the joint accounts." I told her. We had one joint checking account, which we both contributed to for household expenses. My direct deposit went partly there and partly into my personal checking, which Garrett had no access to. My Roth IRA was entirely mine. His 401k was entirely his. "Good," she said. "The separation of your personal savings matters. Do you know if Diane has had any financial conversations with Garrett that you're aware of? Not the land. I mean specifically about your household finances." I thought about it. Not directly, but she spent 11 days in our house. She saw the statements. Patricia nodded slowly. The power of attorney she filed on Raymond Kowalski's estate. That's a separate legal matter, and it's going to be Garrett's to unravel, not yours. What concerns me more, from where you're sitting, is the pattern. She looked at me steadily. A woman comes into your home under a pretense. She accesses your financial documents. Her son, your husband, minimizes your concerns and sides with her when there's a direct conflict. That pattern either stops here or it doesn't stop at all. She gave me a list of things to do and not do. I listened. I took notes on my phone. When I walked out 40 minutes later into the gray November cold, I felt the particular clarity that comes not from having solved a problem, but from understanding its exact shape. Garrett texted me while I was in the parking lot. "Can we talk tonight? Just us." I typed back, "Yes, I'll be home by 7." I drove home the long way, past Clover Ridge Elementary, which sat quiet and dark on a Monday with the parking lot empty. I slowed down when I passed it. 26 kids who needed me to show up tomorrow morning, steady and present and ready. That mattered. That was real. I held on to it. When I got home at 7, Diane's coat was on the hook by the door, but the house was quiet. Garrett was at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, which told me he'd been thinking about what to say, which told me more than the coffee itself. I sat down across from him and wrapped my hands around the mug. He looked like he hadn't slept. There were shadows under his eyes and a particular tightness around his mouth that I recognized as the expression he wore when he was trying to be fair to 2 things that couldn't both be accommodated. "I talked to Dale Pritchard today," he said. "Called him back. The land is real. About 14 acres near Calhoun County. My grandfather bought it in the late 90s and never did anything with it. It's not worth a fortune, but it's worth something. Pritchard said current estimates put it around $80,000. $80,000. I didn't say anything. I let that sit. "My mom filed for power of attorney over the estate 8 months ago," Garrett continued. "She told me tonight that she was trying to protect it from, her words, outside claims. I don't fully know what that means yet." He paused. "I asked her directly why she was in our filing drawer. She said she was looking for a pen." "She was not looking for a pen," I said, quietly, not angry, just clearly. He looked at me for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I know that." It was the first time in 11 days that I believed he was actually seeing what was in front of him. "I told her she needs to go home," he said. "Tomorrow morning. The HVAC thing, I checked with the building management. The repair was done 10 days ago. She could have gone back last week." I didn't say I knew it or "I told you so." Those are the words of a person who wants to win an argument. I didn't want to win an argument. I wanted to know if I still had a marriage worth staying in. "What I said about dinner," Garrett said. "Don't nitpick." He stopped, started again. "I'm not going to excuse that. I said it because I was tired and because it was easier in the moment than dealing with it. And that's not good enough." The furnace clicked on. Somewhere in the back of the house, I heard Diane's television low and muffled. "It's not just the dinner," I said. "I know. It's the pattern. Every time there's a conflict between what your mother wants and what I need, you find a way to make me the unreasonable one. You don't do it loudly. You do it quietly, which almost makes it worse, because I end up thinking maybe I am being unreasonable." I set down my mug. "I'm not unreasonable, Garrett. I skipped lunch to help a 10-year-old through a panic attack and came home hungry to a kitchen that smelled like dinner and was told to eat cereal." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the creek moved steadily through the dark. "No," he said finally, "you're not unreasonable." In the morning, Diane came downstairs with her suitcase already packed. I don't know what Garrett said to her the night before, after I went to bed. I'd heard their voices low and continuous for about an hour, but I hadn't listened at the door. I wasn't that version of myself anymore. She set the suitcase by the front door and came into the kitchen where I was making toast. I'd gotten up at my normal time, not 5:15. I didn't need to do anything in secret now. Diane stood in the kitchen doorway. She looked older than she had 11 days ago, or maybe I was just seeing her more clearly. She was 63 years old, and she'd spent 11 days in my house trying to figure out how much she could claim, and she'd been caught, and now she was leaving. "I want you to know," she said, "that I have always had Garrett's best interests at heart." I turned around and looked at her directly. "I know you believe that," I said, "but Garrett's best interest and your best interest aren't always the same thing. I think you know that too." She picked up the handle of her suitcase. "You're not what I expected," she said. "It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it wasn't nothing either." "I know," I said. Garrett drove her home. I called Renata from the front porch while his car backed out of the driveway, the cold air sharp in my lungs. "She's gone," I said. "How are you?" I thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet. Better than I was. Not all the way okay." "That's accurate," Renata said. "That's actually the right answer." The weeks that followed were not a movie. There was no dramatic courtroom moment, no single scene of reckoning where everything was resolved in one clean sweep. Real life doesn't work that way, and I'd been a fifth-grade teacher long enough to know that the most important things almost never announce themselves. Patricia Osei filed a formal inquiry on my behalf regarding the document access. Not a lawsuit, but a documented record, a paper trail. Insurance, she called it. "You hope you never need it," she said, "and you're glad it exists." Garrett hired his own attorney to challenge the power of attorney Diane had filed over his grandfather's estate. It took 4 months. The process was not simple, and it was not cheap. And there were 2 evenings in January when he sat at the kitchen table with paperwork spread out in front of him and looked like a man understanding for the first time that certain decisions made by people who love you can cost you more than the decisions of strangers. The land in Calhoun County was eventually put into proper probate proceedings. As of the last I knew, it hadn't sold yet. But it was his now, legally and clearly, and whatever it turned out to be worth would be his. He and I went to 3 sessions with a couples counselor, a woman named Dr. Vivian Park, who had an office in a building near the hospital and who asked questions so precise they felt almost surgical. The 3rd session was the hardest one. Garrett said something in that room that I hadn't expected him to be able to say, about the specific way he'd learned to manage his mother by making other people smaller. And I watched him say it, and understood that understanding a thing and changing it are 2 different projects, and that the second one takes longer. We didn't split up. I want to be honest about that. I went to Patricia Osei, knowing I might need to, and I left her office knowing I didn't have to yet, and there's a meaningful difference between those 2 things. I stayed, not because staying was easier or because I was afraid of being alone, but because the man who said "I know" across the kitchen table at 7 o'clock on a Monday night was someone I was willing to find out more about. Diane and I have not had a warm reconciliation. I don't expect one. She came for Christmas because Garrett asked her to, and I set 3 plates at the dinner table, and she ate the food I cooked without comment, which is its own kind of statement. She and I will probably always be what we were. 2 people who didn't choose each other, navigating the shared space of someone they both love. I can live with that. What I won't do is make myself smaller to make that easier for her. The filing drawer in the spare room is still there. I reorganized it in December, not because Diane had disturbed it, but because I wanted to know exactly what was in it. Insurance policies, the lease, account statements, my pay stubs, my Roth IRA documentation, every piece of paper that represents what I've built, what I've earned, what I'm owed. I know what's in there now, all of it, and that knowledge sits in me like ballast, steady, low, and mine. My students came back from winter break in January talking about their holidays, about presents and cousins and too much food, and I listened to all of it with the particular attention I have for things that are genuinely small and genuinely good. There's a girl in my class named Priya who had been having a hard fall. the one I'd stayed with through a panic attack the day I came home hungry to a house that didn't have dinner for me. By January, she was doing better. She'd started raising her hand again. You show up. That's the thing. You show up steady and you hold the room together and you make sure each person in it knows they're seen. You do that for 26 10-year-olds and then you come home and you do it for yourself too. The creek out back flooded again in March, as it does every spring, crept up the bank and spread across the low part of the yard and left a line of debris when it receded, the way water always marks where it's been. Garrett and I stood on the back porch and watched it together with our coffee, the way we sometimes do on weekend mornings when the world is quiet enough to let us. Some things wash away, some things leave a mark. The trick, I've decided, is knowing the difference and making sure the marks that remain are the ones you chose.